Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning at MT Cloud Monastery for Sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso. Today, we'll be taking a look at Majjhima Nikaya 29, the Mahasaropama Sutta, the Greater Discourse on the Simile of Heartwood. And you can find a copy of the sutta in the live chat by clicking the link. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them into the live chat and we will address them at the end of the talk. So good morning so far to Gita and Yana, Jens, Michael, Sean, and Cam. And we have people joining from all over the country and the world, it seems. Sean is watching from Quebec, and Michael's watching from rainy Brooklyn. Jens is in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Cam's also in Manhattan. So welcome, everyone, as well as people who are watching, but silent. So I'll pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso for Sutta study.
Okay, thank you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So as mentioned, we'll be going through the Mahasaropama Sutta today. So that's Majjhima Nikaya number 29, the Greater Discourse on the Simile of Heartwood. As usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give some explanations, and then at the end we can have some discussion. And the sutta is not particularly long, so we'll try to get through all of it today. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the prosperous one was dwelling at Vulture Peak Mountain, not long after the departure of Devadatta. So first off, just to say a bit about this, the term being translated here as prosperous one is Bhagava. So Bhagava, by convention, it's for some reason people translated it as blessed one all the time. But the word Bhagava literally means one who has something valuable. So here that's being rendered as the prosperous one. But keeping that in mind, what this is referring to is the fact that the Buddha has that which is most valuable, which is purity of heart and a clear understanding of the nature of reality. So he has true wealth, the most valuable thing in the world. And it says here, not long after the departure of Devadatta. So Devadatta was a Buddhist monk who became corrupted by wealth, by fame, and on account of that obsession with wealth and fame, he wound up making some very bad choices. He tried to replace the Buddha. He tried to take control of the monastic community. He even tried to kill the Buddha at one point. So Devadatta had originally started off as actually quite a promising monk with very strong samadhi, who was making very swift progress along the path. But because of his lingering obsession with wealth and fame, then when those things manifested, he became completely obsessed with them and lost track of the goal. He lost sight of the real purpose of Buddhist practice. And as a result, he fell prey to his defilements and started making really unwholesome choices. So after he tried to kill the Buddha, then Devadatta was expelled from the monastic order, which should come as no surprise. So this sutta takes place shortly after Devadatta was kicked out of the monastic community. So the Buddha says, so it says there, in reference to Devadatta, the Blessed One. Oh, see, I'm so used to translating Bhagava as Blessed One, I even fell prey to it myself here. So there, in reference to Devadatta, the prosperous one addressed the monks. Monks, here some gentleman, based on faith, has left behind lay life and become a monastic renunciant, thinking, I am caught in birth, decay, death, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish, caught in suffering and enveloped by suffering. Perhaps a way to put an end to this whole heap of suffering can be discerned. So that's a very admirable way to start off. So somebody has faith in the Buddha, faith that the Buddha is enlightened, faith that there are enlightened beings in the world, faith in the Dhamma, so faith that there are teachings which point towards awakening, and faith in the Sangha, so faith that by joining a community of fellow Buddhist practitioners, one has a greater chance of making progress towards awakening. So based on faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, somebody chooses to leave behind lay life, to leave behind the comfort and ease of an ordinary lay life, and to enter monastic life as a renunciant. So this is a pretty significant step for many people. For some of us, it's actually quite natural, but for many people, it's a significant step to leave behind their television and their liquor cabinet and their partner and to enter into a austere monastic life. But because one has this deep faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and a recognition that one is caught by birth, decay, death, sorrow, depression, anguish, and so on, and one has this sincere wish to attain awakening, then monastic renunciation is something we can go for. It's something we can appreciate as being a viable way of developing the mind of awakening. So the sutta continues. When he has become a renunciant in this way, wealth, respect, and fame appear. So this happens. So when one becomes a monastic renunciant, despite one's willingness to let go of worldly things, such as property and possessions and nice robes and so on, and as much as one is in it purely for the sake of awakening, nonetheless, people respect us. They respect us because of our attempt to be spiritually pure. And one can develop a certain amount of fame, especially if one becomes a good teacher, or if one has a charismatic personality, then it's easy to acquire a certain amount of repute, a certain amount of fame. So although we don't enter monastic life with the intention of acquiring wealth, respect, and fame, they have a way of happening, has a way of accruing. And the longer you're a monk, the more likely it is that you're going to start to collect wealth, respect, and fame. So it says, when he has become a renunciant in this way, wealth, respect, and fame appear. He is satisfied with that wealth, respect, and fame, and it completely fills his thoughts. Because of that wealth, respect, and fame, he praises himself and disparages others, saying, I have wealth, respect, and fame, but these other monks are not well known and have little influence. Those peasants. So what's happening here? He's falling, well, first off, he's obsessed with wealth, respect, and fame. He's satisfied with it. He doesn't see something more important to aspire towards. He's always thinking about it. His mind is filled with how great he is with all his wealth, respect, and fame. And then he becomes arrogant, conceited, thinking, oh, I am the great one. These are not the great ones. By the way, just for the record, through this sutta, I did use the male pronoun, and that's because the Buddha was talking about Devadatta, who was in fact a male. But of course, this applies equally to people of all genders, just to be clear on that. So then the sutta says, intoxicated by that wealth, respect, and fame, he becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. So negligent and heedless here means negligent of the spiritual training. So heedless in terms of protecting one's mind. So one begins to neglect the development of morality, concentration, and wisdom. One is heedless, and that one carelessly allows harmful mind states to arise and persist. One makes no sincere effort to cultivate and develop wholesome mind states. And what happens is, as our mind becomes overwhelmed with unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome mind states, as we fall deeper into immorality, as our mind becomes scattered and distracted and dispersed, as we fall deeper and deeper into foolishness, then what happens is our dukkha just keeps getting worse. Our suffering keeps building up. So here in this example the Buddha is giving, this person started off with entering monastic life thinking, I want to put an end to dukkha. I want to put an end to my suffering. But then they get so absorbed and obsessed with wealth, respect, and fame that they wind up just increasing their own suffering. They lose sight of the true goal of the spiritual life, and they just build up their suffering rather than diminishing it. So then the Buddha gives a simile, and this is the flagship simile of the sutta, from which the sutta gets its name. The Buddha says, monks, just as if a person who needed heartwood was seeking heartwood and was wandering in search of heartwood, came to a large stable tree that had heartwood. So for those who are not familiar with trees, heartwood is the dense, hard wood at the core of a tree. It's the most valuable part of a tree. It's the part which makes the best lumber, the best firewood, the best everything. No matter what you're trying to do, heartwood is going to be the best material for it. Then by extension, heartwood in the suttas is used to mean the essence of something, the best part of something, the most important part of something, the most valuable part of something. So he says, this person is seeking heartwood and comes to a large stable tree that had heartwood. He would bypass its heartwood, its softwood, its inner bark, and its outer bark. He would cut off its branches and leaves and depart, thinking it is heartwood. Then a person with eyes would see this and say, this honorable person does not know what heartwood is, what softwood is, what inner bark is, what outer bark is, what leaves and branches are. This honorable person needed heartwood, was seeking heartwood, and was wandering in search of heartwood, and came to a large stable tree that had heartwood. He bypassed its heartwood, softwood, inner bark, and outer bark. He cut off its branches and leaves and departed, thinking it is heartwood. Whatever he is planning to do that requires heartwood will not be successful. So this is the simile of somebody who enters monastic life, but then winds up getting obsessed with wealth, respect, and fame. It's like somebody who's going out to get heartwood, and instead they just cut off some branches and leaves. And they leave thinking, oh, I've got heartwood. But they haven't. They've just gotten the most useless part of the tree. Branches and leaves aren't good for much of anything. You want to build a house? Branches and leaves will not help you. You want to build a fire? Well, branches and leaves will burn for a little while, but then they'll go out very quickly. You want to carve a statue? Well, branches and leaves won't get you very far unless you're making an extremely tiny statue. So it's not really good for much of anything. So this person, again, it's like the branches and leaves are just the outermost but least significant manifestation of the tree. So in the same way, wealth, respect, and fame are the outermost manifestations of monastic life, but the least important, the least significant, the least valuable, the least useful. So people come to Buddhist monasteries and they see big fancy buildings and they see monks wearing shiny robes, and it's like, well, I am a 4th level bishop with a certification from the King of Thailand. Well, whoop-de-doo, good for you. That means absolutely zero, nothing, totally meaningless. But people get obsessed with these things. They're like, well, I am better than those other monks. I've got the 4th level certificate from the King of Thailand. He's only got the 3rd level certificate. I'm so much better. Well, no, you're not. You're just obsessed with the branches and leaves. Totally missing the point. It's like, well, my robes are made from lotus root fibers. His are only made from cotton. So sad, pathetic. I am the winner. So much winning. Well, once again, it's completely missing the point of monastic life. Monastic life is not about getting the fancy, expensive robes. Any old robe is fine. Traditionally, monks would make robes out of discarded rags. They would go to cemeteries and take scraps of cloth off of dead bodies and wash them and weave robes out of them. So any robe is fine. It doesn't need to be anything special. And whether people respect us or not, who cares? The important thing is not wealth, respect, and fame. The important thing is developing the bright qualities of heart that lead towards awakening. The important thing is developing morality. It's developing concentration. It's developing wisdom. The important thing is developing a deep understanding of the Dhamma and living in accordance with it. That's what's important. That's the Heartwood. So to get all obsessed with wealth, respect, and fame, with clerical titles and certificates and so on, well, that's just getting caught up in the leaves and branches. So I say no thank you. There's a really lovely story from the life of Ajahn Chah. So Ajahn Chah was my teacher's teacher. He's a very famous monk in Thailand. And at one point he was invited by the king of Thailand to come and receive an official clerical certificate. So getting the title Jiao Kun, which means like honorable lord, which is this fancy title that they give to well-respected monks. And Ajahn Chah refused to come. He wrote back a reply saying, sometimes, how does it go? It says, sometimes there's rain but no lightning. Sometimes there's lightning but no rain. Thunder? Sometimes there's rain but no thunder. Sometimes there's thunder but no rain. Something like that. And he never went to get his title because he was basically like, what are you guys talking about? Titles? I don't need a title. I don't need a certificate. That's not the purpose of what we're doing here. So then the Buddha gives another, he clarifies. He says, monks, in the same way, here's some gentlemen based on faith, and he gives the story again of the person intoxicated by wealth, respect, and fame. So he says, intoxicated by that wealth, respect, and fame, he becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. Monks, this is called a monk who has taken the branches and leaves of the spiritual life. He has ended with that. In other words, we set out searching for the heartwood of the spiritual life, and we just cut off the branches and leaves, and we end with that. Pretty pathetic, isn't it? Getting caught up in wealth, respect, and fame. Pretty pathetic. So I remember I was talking a while back to a monk about something, and he basically said he wasn't willing to be involved in a certain project because he didn't want to threaten his certificate from the king of Thailand. I'm like, really? You want the leaves and branches? Okay, fine, keep your leaves and branches. That's fine, bye. So next example the Buddha gives. He says, monks, here some gentleman, based on faith, has left behind lay life and become a monastic renunciant, thinking, I am caught in birth, decay, death, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish, caught in suffering and enveloped by suffering. Perhaps a way to put an end to this whole heap of suffering can be discerned. So same introductory statement, same starting mentality. So similarly, this is someone who enters monastic life with a pure start, pure wish, pure aspiration, which is my name, by the way. My name, Suddhaso, means pure aspiration. And it says, when he has become a renunciant in this way, wealth, respect, and fame appear. Uh-oh. He is not satisfied with that wealth, respect, and fame, and it does not completely fill his thoughts. In other words, he's like, boring, not interested. That's not what I came here for. He does not praise himself or disparage others because of that wealth, respect, and fame. He's like, what's the big deal? It's just leaves and branches. Why would I make a big deal out of this? not intoxicated by that wealth, respect, and fame, he does not become negligent or heedless. Being vigilant, he attains perfect morality. This is great. So since he's not obsessed with wealth, respect, and fame, then he diligently focuses on training his mind, on cultivating the qualities that lead towards awakening. And of course, the foundational quality is morality. So here we're seeing a progression which we see many places in the sutta. So first there's faith, then there's morality. So it's coming to step 2, which is morality. So first there's faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Then based on that faith, we cultivate morality. And the principles of Buddhist morality at its heart is not to harm anyone, try to help everyone. That's it. Every other aspect of Buddhist morality is a derivative of these 2 basic principles. Don't hurt anyone, try to help everyone. That's it. So he attains perfect morality. He is satisfied with that perfection of morality, but it completely fills his thoughts. Uh-oh, he's getting obsessed with his morality. Look how moral I am. I am so pure and virtuous. Uh-oh, conceit and arrogance creeping in again. Because of that perfection of morality, he praises himself and disparages others. Uh-oh. Saying, I am moral and innately good, but these other monks are immoral and innately evil. Intoxicated by that perfection of morality, he becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. So here's another case of downfall. So we recognize that wealth, respect, and fame are not so important. We build up our morality, and then we get obsessed about how wonderfully virtuous and moral we are. How many times have we seen this in other people? People who get up on their high horse like, I am such a good person, not like those horrendous, disgusting, immoral people out there. And more importantly, how often have we seen this in ourselves? How often have we seen in our own mind that conceit of superiority? I am the moral and virtuous one, not like those others. How often have we seen that attitude in our own mind? We know it's disgusting when we see it in other people, but it's just as disgusting in our own mind. And more importantly, it prevents us from making progress on the path. What the Buddha is pointing to here is the tendency of stopping our progress by thinking we've hit something really valuable and not realizing that it's just another stepping stone. It's just another step along the path. So then he gives the simile of Heartwood again. So in this case, the person comes to a large stable tree that has heartwood, bypasses its heartwood, its softwood, and its inner bark. He would cut off its outer bark and depart, thinking it is heartwood. So this is a little better. They're getting a little closer to heartwood. They recognize that the branches and leaves are not the heartwood, but they think the outer bark is the heartwood. So the outer bark is the crusty bark on the outer part of the tree. So then a person with eyes would say, this person does not know heartwood, softwood, inner bark, outer bark, leaves and branches, etc. Whatever he's planning to do that requires heartwood will not be successful. So once again, of course, you can't build a house using bark. You can't make a sculpture using bark. Your fire will produce a lot of smoke and it won't be particularly warm and it won't be particularly long lasting. So bark, not terribly useful, especially not if you're trying to do something that requires heartwood. And so he says, in the same way, here's some gentleman, etc., intoxicated by that perfection of morality, becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. Monks, this is called a monk who has taken the outer bark of the spiritual life. He has ended with that. So, of course, morality is good. It's important. It's a critical element of Buddhist practice, foundational element of Buddhist practice, but it's not the goal. And if we use our morality as a basis for arrogance, then we've fallen off the path. We've gotten distracted, sidetracked. So next scenario, we have the case of someone who, based on faith, becomes a monastic with the usual reflection. Wealth, respect, and fame appear, but he doesn't get obsessed with it. He attains perfect morality, doesn't get obsessed with that either. And so it says, not intoxicated by that perfection of morality, he does not become negligent or heedless. Being vigilant, he attains perfect concentration. That's samadhi. He is satisfied with that perfection of concentration, but it completely fills his thoughts. Uh-oh, danger. Because of that perfection of concentration, he praises himself and disparages others, saying, I am concentrated with a unified mind, but these other monks are unconcentrated and scatter-minded. Intoxicated by that perfection of concentration, he becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. So this is another case of, once again, getting caught in something less than the goal. So when one develops faith and morality, then one has the foundation for samadhi. So samadhi is mental unification, collecting the mind, holding the mind together, gathering the mind, stabilizing the mind. And this is very important as a foundation for developing deep wisdom. But in and of itself, it's not the goal of the spiritual life. It's just another conditional phenomenon that appears within samsara. So it's important to recognize it, once again, as just being a stepping stone. And also something which in and of itself is not particularly spectacular. So it's easy to think, oh, well, my samadhi is so much better than these others. That means I am the great one. I'm the one who's got the great samadhi. Look how amazing I am. I get like 18 jhanas, let alone 8. I get like 1,000,000 jhanas. Well, good for you, I guess. And actually, it is good. It's good to get strong samadhi. It's good to have deep concentration. It's good to know how to stabilize and collect and unify your mind. These are very important elements of Buddhist practice. But if we stop there, then we will not attain awakening. And if we use that samadhi as a basis for arrogance, conceit, and disparagement, then we will fall away from the path to awakening. We will backslide. And this was one of the things that happened with Devadatta. So Devadatta actually developed incredibly strong samadhi. And that was part of the basis of his arrogance. His arrogance was to some extent based upon the knowledge that he had amazingly good samadhi. But as he fell deeper and deeper into arrogance, then he started losing his samadhi power. It became harder and harder for him to concentrate because he was so fixated on his arrogance, on his conceit. And eventually he lost samadhi entirely. He could no longer enter into states of concentration. So this is the danger. We fall when we stop before we've reached the goal. And when we fall into arrogance and conceit, then we start to lose the progress that we've made. We start backsliding. So the next case, so here he again uses the simile of Heartwood. And in this case, it's the example of someone who comes to a tree, bypasses its heartwood and its softwood, and instead cuts off its inner bark. So the inner bark is the thin paper-like layer that's between the outer bark and the wood. So the outer bark is like the crusty bark, and then there's this thin paper-like bark that's between the outer bark and the wood. So again, we're getting closer to the heartwood, closer to the essence, but still not quite there. So taking the inner bark is still missing the point. Again, you can't do anything useful with inner bark. You can't do anything that you would need heartwood for. Again, you can't build a house, you can't make a sculpture, you can't make a good fire. There's not much good you can do with inner bark. You could maybe write something on it, but writing wasn't a big thing at the time of the Buddha, so that wasn't seen as being much useful. So And again, he says, here some gentleman intoxicated by that perfection of concentration becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. Monks, this is called a monk who has taken the inner bark of the spiritual life. He has ended with that. So the next scenario starts off the same. So based on faith, someone becomes a monastic. Wealth, respect, and fame appear, but they're not interested. They gain perfection of morality and concentration, but they don't get obsessed with that either. So then it says, being not intoxicated by that perfection of concentration. He does not become negligent or heedless. Being vigilant, he attains knowledge and vision. This is starting to sound pretty good. So knowledge and vision is when we start to get a deep, direct understanding of reality. So beyond the ordinary, superficial understanding that most people have. We start to have some deeper understanding of what this reality is, what this mind is, what conscious experience is. So some deeper level of understanding and wisdom starts to arise beyond the normal. But there's still some danger here. And so it says, he is satisfied with that knowledge and vision, and it completely fills his thoughts. Because of that knowledge and vision, he praises himself and disparages others, saying, I know and I see, but these other monks live unknowing and unseeing. Intoxicated by that knowledge and vision, he becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. So even as we start to get farther along the path, and we start to get some deep understanding of the nature of reality, which usually starts off as intellectual understanding. So this may come from you study the suttas a lot, you listen to a lot of Dhamma talks, you read a lot of books, and you start to get some intellectual understanding of reality. It starts to come together in your mind, and you're like, now I know what dependent origination is talking about. Now I know what emptiness means. And you might get obsessed with that and use it as a basis for disparaging others. Like, those pathetic monks don't understand emptiness. In fact, they think emptiness isn't even Buddhist. They know nothing. But it could even be deeper than that. Maybe actually in your meditation practice, you get to a point where you do start to get some sense of the insubstantial, impermanent, hollow, empty nature of all phenomena. You start to get some direct feeling for the true substance of reality. But since the mind is not fully awakened, it's still prone to error. We're still prone to falling into unwholesome habits, unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome attitudes. So we need to watch out that we don't then start to get arrogant and conceited. We need to watch out that we also don't stop pushing onward with our practice, that we don't quit before we reach the final goal. It's important that we always keep moving forward, that we always keep making progress, and that we recognize that everybody else, they are where they are in their practice. And at some point, we were where they are. And if they practice diligently, then no matter how far ahead of them we might be, if they practice diligently, eventually they'll get to the same level that we're at. So dropping the arrogance and the conceit and seeing everybody that we encounter as being a fellow practitioner. And whatever level of understanding they have, that's okay. That's just where they are. Whatever level of understanding we have, that's okay. That's just where we are. So not falling into this whole comparison game, discrimination game, but just letting people be wherever they are. And if we have an opportunity to help people, then of course we help people. If we don't have the opportunity to help, then we wish them well. But not falling into this arrogance and conceit. And always being aware of the limitations of our own knowledge, the limitations of our own concepts and beliefs, the limitations of our own opinions and views. Until we attain awakening, no matter how much knowledge and vision we think we have, it is still imperfect and incomplete. It's still flawed. So always keeping that humility. Only with full awakening does humility mean a recognition that one has reached the final goal. Until then, we always need to be humble, to know that we're not yet all the way there. And that also means being willing to acknowledge that we have more to learn. Whatever we think we know, we need to be honest with ourselves and say, actually, I don't know. I don't know everything. I might be wrong about some things. There might be more I need to learn. One Zen story which made a deep impact in my mind is somebody asked a Zen master, how do you train? How do you train yourself? And the Zen master said, if I encounter a 6-year-old with something to teach, then I listen. If I encounter an 80-year-old with something to learn, then I teach. So that's that attitude of both humility and compassion. So never thinking, I am the one who knows everything. I have nothing left to learn. Never thinking that. Always, always, always accepting that somebody might have something new to tell you. Always giving them the benefit of the doubt, listening to what they say. And you might then conclude that it's utter rubbish and they're totally clueless. But listen, learn, see what there is. And maybe what you learn is that you have something to teach that person. And if so, then you teach, you help. But always keeping that mind of humility, of knowing that we're not yet fully awakened. And there's still more to learn, more to do. So he gives again the simile of the heartwood. In this case, it's somebody who comes to the tree, bypasses its heartwood, but cuts off its softwood into parts, thinking it's heartwood. So this is an easy error to make. You come to a tree, you know the branches and leaves aren't heartwood, you know the outer bark is not heartwood, you know the inner bark is not heartwood. So you strip off the inner bark and you find wood. And it seems pretty hard, seems pretty solid, seems pretty dense. You're like, pretty good. I'll take this wood. It's wood. It'll do whatever I need to do with wood. And actually, it's getting close. So softwood, you can make lumber using softwood. It's not the best lumber, but it's serviceable to a certain extent. Doesn't last very long. It's not very sturdy, but it'll kind of do the job somewhat. You can make a sculpture. Again, it won't be very durable. You'll have problems. I've actually been carving something out of softwood, and I've discovered that actually softwood is not the best thing to carve out of. It seems easy because the tool cuts very easily into the softwood, but actually that's quite problematic. It's actually quite difficult to do an accurate carving out of softwood. Hardwood is much easier. Seems more difficult at the beginning, but it's actually much easier in the long run. And as for fire, softwood also, it seems like it's making a great fire. Catches fire pretty easily, burns hot, but it burns out quickly. So it doesn't make a good long-lasting fire. A few times in my monastic life, I've been living in cabins where it was all heated by a wood stove. And one of the things you have to learn in the winter is how to make a fire which will burn for 8 hours. Because otherwise you're going to wake up freezing cold in the middle of the night. And softwood will not burn for 8 hours. It will not. Goes out very quickly. You need those good, hard, dense logs. Those are the ones that will burn all night long and keep you warm through to the morning. So not to be fooled by the softwood. Not be fooled because you're not yet to the best. You're not yet to the most durable, the most stable, the most important, the most valuable. So similarly, when we start to get some deeper knowledge and vision, some deeper understanding of reality, then we can start to think that we're getting to what's really valuable. But actually, we're not quite there yet. We're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. So the Buddha says in the same way, here's some gentleman, etc., intoxicated by that knowledge and vision, becomes negligent and heedless. Being negligent, he dwells in suffering. Monks, this is called a monk who has taken the softwood of the spiritual life. He has ended with that. So then the next case the Buddha gives. He says, monks, here's some gentlemen based on faith. So as before, they enter monastic life with all the right reasons. They get wealth, respect, and fame, but they're not interested. They get perfect morality, perfect concentration, knowledge and vision, but they're not obsessed with these things either. So the Buddha says, not intoxicated by that knowledge and vision, he does not become negligent or heedless. Being vigilant, he attains timeless liberation. Monks, it is impossible for that monk to lose that timeless liberation. So now we're finally to the Heartwood. So the Heartwood is timeless liberation. And this is a somewhat unusual term. You don't find this very often in the suttas. So the Pali is asamaya vimutti. So vimutti means liberation, complete freedom. Samaya means moment or occasion. So asamaya means not momentary, not occasional, not temporary, not dependent upon time, not dependent upon a certain time and place. So asamaya vimutti, it's a liberation which is not temporary, not momentary, not occasional, not limited to a certain point in time. So this means, for one thing, it's something which can't be lost. So one thing which is made clear throughout the suttas is that the absolute is ever present. So once you touch it, you can't lose it. Once you attain it, you can't lose it. It's always been here and always will be here. It's just we don't see it, we don't feel it, we don't know it. So what's going on here? Again, so one attains first a limited degree of knowledge and vision, but then when one recognizes, I've not yet reached the highest, I've not yet reached timeless liberation. So one keeps vigilantly practicing until one's knowledge and vision becomes perfect and complete, and one attains timeless liberation. And you'll notice that in breaking with the pattern of the previous selections, this person does not then get obsessed with timeless liberation and start praising themselves and disparaging others because of timeless liberation. And that's because timeless liberation also necessarily comes with the destruction of conceit, the elimination of arrogance. So with the attainment of timeless liberation, one also recognizes that there is no one to praise and no one to disparage. That praising and disparaging are just part of the meaningless games of unenlightened beings. And they have no relevance whatsoever to one who sees reality as it is. One sees that absolutely everything has its place. Absolutely every being is filling their role in samsara. There's no sense in disparaging anyone because every single person is simply playing their part. They're demonstrating some piece of samsara. There's a really beautiful thing from the Mahayana teachings, from the Avatamsaka Sutra, Huayan Sutra. And it's the Bodhisattva Saddha Paributta. And his name has two meanings. One meaning is never despising, and the other meaning is always despised. So this comes from this bodhisattva's vow. So this bodhisattva made the vow that he would never disparage anyone because every single person had the potential to eventually become a Buddha. So he would see someone and he would be like, I can't possibly despise you because you could be a Buddha someday. And then the people would make fun of him and be like, oh, you silly idiot, what are you doing? Claiming we're going to be Buddhas, you dumbass. And so they were despising him. So he has this name, the one who never despises, but who is always despised. Bodhisattva Saddha Paributta. So that's because the Bodhisattva Saddha Paributta already had some sense that an enlightened being does not despise anyone, does not disparage anyone, recognizes the capacity of all beings to attain awakening, and does not think less of anyone on account of where they are on the path. So that's the kind of mind that we're aiming at. Not to think more of ourselves or less of others, or less of ourselves and more of others. But just to recognize, if we're not yet enlightened, then we have more to do. And if we are enlightened, then there's nothing left to do except help others. That's it. There's only two modes. Either we're not enlightened, in which case we need to work on it, or we are enlightened, in which case we help others. That's it. Two options. And it's not really an option. So then the Buddha again comes to the simile of the heartwood. He says, just as if a person who needed heartwood, was seeking heartwood, and was wandering in search of heartwood, came to a large stable tree that had heartwood, he would cut off its heartwood and depart, knowing it is heartwood. Notice the difference. Before it says thinking it is heartwood, but now it says knowing it is heartwood. This is someone who gets to the heartwood and knows it for what it is. Then a person with eyes would see this and say, this honorable person knows what heartwood is, what softwood is, what inner bark is, what outer bark is, what leaves and branches are. This honorable person needed heartwood, was seeking heartwood, and was wandering in search of heartwood, and came to a large stable tree that had heartwood. He cut off its heartwood and departed, knowing it was heartwood. Whatever he is planning to do that requires heartwood will be successful. He says, monks, in the same way, here some gentleman attains timeless liberation. Monks, it is impossible for that monk to lose that timeless liberation. Thus, monks, the benefit of the spiritual life is not wealth, respect, and fame. It is not the perfection of morality. It is not the perfection of concentration. It is not knowledge and vision. Monks, it is this unshakable mental liberation. This is the goal of the spiritual life. This is its heartwood. This is its complete conclusion. This is what the prosperous one said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the prosperous one's speech. Sadhu, 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 sadhu. So, I don't really have much more to say because it stands for itself. The Buddha is pointing here always at the essence, always at the heart, always at what's most valuable and what's most important, and not getting caught on anything less than that, but also not despising those who get caught on less than that. Just seeing that's where they are, and if we can help them, then we help. But if we can't help them, then we don't think less of them. We don't despise them. We just see that they're trying to figure things out and making mistakes like we all do. But we resolve to not make mistakes ourselves. We resolve to keep doing our best to progress towards the highest, towards the true goal of the spiritual life, the complete liberation of mind. So that's all I have to say about this particular sutta. At this time, if there's any questions or comments, please go ahead and I'll answer as best I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so welcome to some more friends joining in. We have Liz, Sarah, Elaine, Carol, Rich, Chi 2003 YY as well, and Ishan. And there are a couple of comments and questions. First off, Elaine says she's a little sick, but listening. And lots of thank yous for sharing the teachings with us, sharing the suttas. And Michael says, I find in my experience that the fastest way to lose concentration is to recognize it and pat myself on the back. Do that and it flies away.
Yeah, recognizing it is fine. So knowing that the mind is concentrated. That's actually under the Satipatthana Sutta. In Chittanupassana, one of the things is to know a concentrated mind as a concentrated mind. So when the mind has samadhi, be aware that it's in samadhi. That's fine. But if you start telling yourself, oh, I've got samadhi, that's great, I'm so great, well, then you're not practicing samadhi anymore. You're practicing self-congratulation. And self-congratulation is actually fine. It's not samadhi practice, but it is recollection of your own goodness, recollection of your own spiritual qualities. So that is a spiritual practice in and of itself. So acknowledging, wow, my samadhi is getting pretty good. Awesome. I'm one step closer to enlightenment. Great. I need to make sure I keep working on this and protect this and develop this. That's all fine. It's not samadhi practice, but it's another part of the path, another aspect of the path. As long as you don't start thinking, well, I've got the best samadhi. My samadhi is way better than yours. I'm like, see how amazing I am, such great samadhi. Then we've got problems. That's not so good. Okay?
He also says, people, Buddhists and non-Buddhists, sometimes ask me to describe my meditation experience. I always beg off, saying that I discuss these only with my teachers, but this attitude of mine is often seen as arrogant. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure where this custom of not describing one's meditation comes from. There's nowhere in the suttas where it says that we shouldn't talk about our meditation with other people. And similarly, I actually do think that to some extent it can be harmful. This attitude of like, I don't talk about my meditation, that can actually be quite harmful. Both for the reasons that you mentioned of irritating and pushing away other people, but actually it can be harmful to ourselves as well. It's kind of like if you go to a doctor and you won't tell the doctor about the injury on your leg, well, the doctor won't help you. But also, if you never let any of your friends see the injury on your leg, then your friends won't help you either. Maybe if one of your friends sees that injury, then they'll help you out, or they'll set up a doctor's appointment, or they'll give you some treatment materials or something. So I actually think that this idea that we shouldn't talk about our meditation practice is quite off base. We should be willing to talk about it. But we also need to have some wisdom in knowing how much to share and when is the right time to share. So it's not necessarily good to share every single detail with every single person. But I also don't think it's good to be completely tight-lipped. So you need to have some discernment about when it's good to share a bit more and when it's good to share a bit less. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And Gita Jnana said double thank yous for sharing the Dhamma and this awesome sutta with us. And Ishan also says the sutta needs to be read again and again and again and again.
That's true for all of them, by the way.
And then Michael has another comment, but I will just read two other questions before that first. So Chi 2003 YY asks, how do we live in this world if we don't prove ourselves, especially in the workplace? Employers look for credentials and there is so much competition, and being humble is a negative quality to have.
So being humble doesn't mean that you hide your good qualities. Being humble means that you have an honest and clear acknowledgement of your qualities, whether good or bad, and that you're willing to reveal both the good and the bad as appropriate. So, for example, if you're great at typing, then humility doesn't mean that you claim you're bad at typing. Humility would be your boss says how you are typing, and you're like, oh, I'm actually really good. That's actually being humble because it's honest, it's true. Arrogance would be saying, I am the best typist in the entire world. You should fire all those other incompetent idiots and triple my salary. That would be a little over the top. But it's also over the top to say, oh, I'm terrible, no good at all. No, just skip over me, I'm useless. That would also be wrong. Be accurate, be honest, be clear. That's humility. But also knowing the right time and place to speak. So if you're just going around the office every day saying like, I am the best typist, I'm so great, well, that's not humility either, is it? That's just using your good quality as a way of building up your arrogance. So there's a time and a place to speak about your good qualities, and a time and a place to be silent about them. You need to have the wisdom to know which is which. But also, you're talking about success in the workplace, which has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't care the slightest bit about your workplace. Totally irrelevant. Okay?
Thank you. And then Gita Jnana asks, Bhante, is it okay to help someone who asks for that help, but they don't want to hear it because we don't want the person to feel bad?
That's challenging. So actually, this happens more often than you might think, where somebody expresses an interest in being helped, but actually they don't want to be helped. And usually where that's coming from is because the person, sometimes they think that they're obligated to say they want help, so that's what they say. Sometimes they actually do realize that they need help, but they actually don't want to be helped. Or they do realize they need help and they do want to be helped, but when it starts coming, their defilements flare up. When they start hearing the Dhamma, they're like, no, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. It goes against my opinions. I like my opinions more than I like the Dhamma. Then you run into problems. And in those cases, actually, the best that you can do is just say like, okay, sorry. We'll talk another time when you're ready. You can't force somebody to accept the Dhamma. But what you can do is to be available when they're ready to hear it. Okay?
Thank you. And Bhavani asks, when I am practicing mindfulness, will there also be wisdom and concentration?
Not necessarily. Mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom are three different qualities. And they're connected, they're interrelated. But you can be practicing mindfulness without concentration and without wisdom. You can practice concentration without mindfulness and without wisdom. And you can practice wisdom without mindfulness and without concentration. But any one of those scenarios won't get you very far, and it won't be of much benefit. Best results are when you practice all three. That's when you get the best results. But you need to make a deliberate, conscious effort to practice all three. If you just pick up one, it's not going to automatically bring the others with it. If you're going to do that, then actually your best bet is to aim at wisdom. Because if you practice wisdom sincerely, then eventually you'll be wise enough to see that you need to work on your concentration and your mindfulness as well. But if you just pick up mindfulness, you're doomed. Sorry, no enlightenment. Okay, next question.
So going back to Michael's comments, the first is the softwood analogy sounds like, okay, my tendency to think I've reached a higher understanding than I actually have, like peeling an onion. And then also in reference to Sadapaributta, walking around encountering others, we say this too is the Buddha, as taught to me by a teacher long, long ago.
Yeah, that's actually a great attitude to practice. A similar one that you'll encounter in the Mahayana teachings is to see every being you encounter as a bodhisattva who's trying to help you attain awakening. And sometimes the way they do that is by testing your patience. But everyone you encounter is a bodhisattva who's trying to help you. So these are ways of changing our attitude. So of course you can say, well, but not everyone I meet is a Buddha. Not everyone I meet is a bodhisattva. And it's like, well, from one perspective, that's true. But if you take on the perspective that everyone you meet is a Buddha or a bodhisattva, how does that shape your mind? How does that change the way you relate to others? How does that change the way you behave? How does that change the way you relate to your own mind? And does that change lead you towards awakening? Keep in mind, that's what we're aiming at. We're aiming at liberation. We're aiming at awakening. we should be evaluating practices in terms of whether they lead towards awakening or not. Everything along the way is just a provisional step. So don't take it too seriously, but rather see, does it point in the right direction or not? Okay?
And that was the last question, but a bunch of thank yous from Jens, Stacy, Carol, Chi, and Gita and Yana, who says, thank you, Aya and Bhantes also. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. We'll have another talk by Bhante Suddhaso, most likely, tonight at 7:30 on personality types in Buddhism. And then tomorrow morning, Bhante Pamuto will be sharing Sutta study with us, and then we'll have monk chat in the evening. And if you're around this weekend, we have our regular alms round at West Orange Farmers Market at 9 a.m. and also 6 p.m. outdoor meditation here at the monastery. And we also actually have a volunteer gardening day at 2 p.m. So Saturday is going to be a very busy day for everyone at the monastery anyway. And then Sunday morning, to keep going, Bhante Suddhaso, who is doing a lot this week, so great, we'll be doing a morning meditation at 9 a.m. in front of our new Buddha statue. So if you can join us for any of those events, online or in person, please do. I also put the link to the listing of our events just so you can keep track on your own. So thanks everyone for stopping by again, and hopefully you can join us later today. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, and have a great day.